and welcome to this gathering for curious minds. There's obviously a lot of them tonight. My name's Abe Drennan, and I have the privilege of moderating today's conversation on secularism. First of all, I'd like to thank Dagmar Gontard, Bill Kilpatrick, and Rory McRandall for courageously calling this conversation. As well, I'd like to thank the Canadian Secular Alliance and the Centre for Inquiry for sponsoring tonight's event. Sean Buck and Michelle Tremblay of Wordbird Media are here providing the slideshow and our technical supports. Thank you, Michelle. I'd also like to thank Aaron Hill for stepping in to help me in the moderation process. What I'd like to do is after I open a little bit, we're going to have the speakers come up, and you're going to hear, for the first hour of tonight's event, 3 speakers. And after that point, we're going to have a little bit of a break, get up, do what we need to do, and then we're going to come back for the second hour and have our small group discussions. And so I'm responsible tonight for providing some structure and holding this space so our conversation may move along well. In this call, I believe there's a yearning to have open dialogue about a meaningful topic, to discover a deeper sense of what it means to be human, to be living in such diversity and uniqueness, but in that be able to find a common ground, a common thread, so that we may weave a stronger blanket that is our common humanity. Tonight we're exploring a topic that touches people's core values. This can be risky because our values are our identity. And if we feel our identities or values are challenged, this can unearth negative emotions. But we're not here to challenge each other's identities, nor to force a strong hand. But we're here tonight to discover our humanity and deepen a sense of harmony in our community. This is our purpose tonight and what I am holding. I invite all of you into this room, but most of all, I invite your curiosity and a little bit of vulnerability. Just a bit. Vulnerability is a human superpower that breaks down barriers and allows us to be open to each other. This is the first time our community has had this conversation. I want us to acknowledge that however imperfect we may be in this, that we respectfully agree that our innocent mistakes may not be punished later. So I'd like to just take us through a few more agreements, that being our first one. I've posted the agreements on the wall up there. In order to have this conversation tonight, the other piece I'd like to remind us about is listening to understand each other. I'd like us to agree respectfully to invite each other's curiosity and respectfully to be together tonight in the room. Is there anything else that someone might feel we need to agree on before we get started? Anything else that might be missing? I'd like to invite too, if you've come up with something, to let us know. Cool. Jim Ford just brought up a neat little thing for us here. He's twittering. He's twittering this event as we're doing it here, and his hashtag is LTA secularism. So if there's anyone else in the room that would like to follow that tweet, please feel free to do that. So it's LTA secularism, right, Jim? Yeah. Let's talk about secularism. LTA secularism. Cool. So I'd like to introduce, so we'll get into the speeches now. I'd like to introduce our first speaker. It's Dagmar Gontard. And having spent some 20 years in Africa and the same length of time in Europe, having now chosen Canada, Dagmar likes to call herself a citizen of the world. Having witnessed the Holocaust and the genocide made her aware of the dark side of humanity, while strengthening her determination to join all the fights on the road to reason. So I'd like to welcome Dagmar.
The flyer is inviting curious minds to inquire about secularism. And I've already heard one inquiry. Are you going to talk about those things like Hinduism and Sufism and so on? So yes, there's a lot of curiosity, but also appreciation for the artistic, for the artistic layout of the flyer. And the artistic touch is Arnie Roosman's work, and for that, Arnie, a very, very warm thank you. Now, back to questions. The one question, of course, which I heard, why talk about secularism? Well, my fellow secularists and I believe that secularism has a positive role to play in our chaotic world. And through our presentations, we will contextualize it. And hopefully, we will succeed to shed some light on those branches of the tree and see if they have something in common, and if yes, what it is, and if not, what is mutually exclusive. And we will define secularism. Now, there are so many terms like secular society, secular constitution, secularization, etc. But let's try to get to the root of it. And I think the root is the Latin word, I need some water, I think. Oh, that's okay. The root is the Latin word secular, which means worldly or temporal, as opposed to eternal. And that very notion of worldly or temporal led the British writer George Holyoake to coin the term secularism. He was one of the fathers of the cooperative movement, and he fought for issues such as freedom of the press, enfranchisement of women, and political reform. And in 1846, he established a socio-political program, and he named it secularism. Now, I am a secularist, and I like short definitions, so my definition goes like this. Secularism is separation and respect. But I am not a scholar, so I turned for help to Professor Phil Zuckerman. In the fall of the last year, he started to offer a bachelor degree precisely in secularism at the Pitzer College in California. And Professor Zuckerman kindly reminded me that secularism has different meanings in different culture contexts. Thus, Turkey, India, Japan, and of course France, have secular constitutions, but there's no such thing as a definite secularism. Now, for a definition, he offered the following one, and I think that everybody can see it. It is secularism is a view that human activities and decisions, especially political ones, should be based on evidence and fact, unbiased by religious influence or faith. Can go to that. Now, beside Professor Zuckermann's and my very short definition, there are other definitions of secularism, but they all boil down to one notion. Religion and politics should be kept separate. And that notion of separation was promoted by religious thinkers such as Martin Luther, John Locke, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison, and probably some others. And also, interestingly, through the history of the North America, it has been groups such as Jews and Baptists and progressive Catholics, and also countless religious minorities, which have championed the secular political ideas. And now let's have a look at the Christian concept of separation between the worldly and the divine. The following words are attributed to Jesus, and I quote, "Render to Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and to God the things which are God's." Now, let's see, isn't it that very idea which actually allowed the idea of secularism to come to fruition? Secularism is a trait of modernity. And Jesus' teaching was modern, but he was ahead of his time. His ideas were too revolutionary for the political and religious authorities of his time. And we know the outcome. Now, few words about Islam. For some Muslims, the idea of separation of the worldly and the divine is very, very difficult to accept. And it may explain why, for some Muslims, the concept of secularism is very difficult to reconcile with their religion. But fortunately, not all Muslims hold that view. We can have that. Here is what Abdullahi Anaim has to say about the secular state, and he is professor of law at the Emory University in Atlanta. So this is what he says. In order to be a Muslim by conviction and free choice, which is the only way one can be Muslim, I need a secular state. Now, this is about the secular state, and Barack Obama has something to say about the secular society. Let's see what he says. In a secular society, the religiously motivated must translate their concerns into universal, rather than religion-specific values. Their proposals must be subject to argument and reason and should not be accorded any undue automatic respect. Now, Abdullahi Anaim is a Muslim, and Barack Obama is a Christian. My fellow secularist is a Baha'i. And they are a secular Muslim association and a secular Jewish association. What does it mean? Well, one doesn't have to be atheist to be secularist. And I have to say the misconception and misunderstanding between secularism being, the same thing as atheism reigns supreme, but it's not exactly the same thing. And now, while I am at that atheism, I will tell you an anecdote. It's a lovely story that American comedian Julia Sweeney likes to tell. One day she met a man, and when she told her mother that that man was an atheist, her mother, obviously horrified, said, "Oh, Julia, if you would have come with somebody who does not believe in God, I could understand. I could accept that. But to come with an atheist, oh no." We the atheists have such a dramatic reputation. I don't know whether we deserve it, but let's demystify atheism. The Greek a, the prefix a, means simply without or absence. So atheism is simply the opposite of theism. In other words, atheism is absence of belief in God or gods or any other supernatural being. Now, what about humanism, which is one of those branches there too? I think that what I have said about human activities, I now feel confident to say that secularism is an expression of humanism. Humanism being what? A confidence in the ability of us humans to deal with the problems we encounter. What about Darwinism? And I had that question. What the heck has the Darwinism to do with the secularism? I think it has a lot to do with secularism. Let's put it that way. Darwin and his Origin of Species have never ceased to trigger the controversy. And the secularists have never ceased to defend the theory of evolution. And I think that the greatest popularizer of Darwin was Robert Greene Ingersoll, the great orator and agnostic and secularist of the late 19th century. And I also want to stress the influence of secularists in the Scopes monkey trial. What was it in 1925? But obviously it was a clash. On one side, religious liberals, agnostics and scientists, and on the other side, the orthodox religionists. Here's a picture. The place is a small town of Dayton in Tennessee. And in May of the year of 1925, a young school teacher, John Scopes, is accused of violating the recent law prohibiting any mention of evolution in the public schools. Now, at that time, there's a recently formed association. It is the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU. And ACLU has secured a high-profile lawyer to defend John Scopes. And what ACLU, and that high-profile lawyer is Clarence Darrow, another agnostic and secularist. And what ACLU and Darrow are hoping, they are hoping to introduce a scientific expert testimony at the trial explaining the theory of evolution, and also showing that many religious leaders believe that evolution and religion are compatible. But the judge categorically refuses any scientific evidence. Why? Well, the idea that the ancestry of humanity could be traced to some apes contradicts the scriptures. So, John Scopes is convicted. That conviction will be later on overturned, but that statute prohibiting the teaching of evolution will remain on Tennessee's books till 1967. And I have to say also one thing why I'm talking about Darwin, and that will be the last one about Darwin. Also in Canada, for many people, Darwin remains a troublemaker. And in 2008, when the Royal Ontario Museum organized exhibit, and the title was Darwin, Evolution, Revolution, the museum was looking for sponsors, and they were only too bold enough to come forward. One was the United Church Observer magazine, and the other was the Humanist Association of Canada. So much for Darwinism, and I think it's high time now to have a look at the mission statement of the that's right, the Canadian Secular Alliance, which, as AB said, is one of the organisms sponsoring our event. So this is what Canadian Secular Alliance has on the website. Cesar believes in church-state separation, the idea that the government of Canada should not favor one religion over others or religious belief over non-belief. Our goal is not to promote atheism. Rather, our commitment is to liberal democratic principles of equality, fairness, and justice for all under the law, regardless of religious belief or lack thereof. So we can go to the tree, and when I look at it, the other day when I look at the tree, I realized that something was missing, but the flyers were already printed, it was too late. But what's missing there, I think, it's the feminism and the abolitionism. You will understand why. Can we go to the next one? Let's listen to Daniel Baril, who happens to be a humanist and also a past president of a secular movement in Quebec. And this is what he says. This is his take on secularism. Secularism is the Republican ideal embodied in the protection of fundamental human rights. All charters which recognize liberty of conscience and equality of individuals without discrimination based on sex, race, or religion are expressions of the quintessence of secularism. You can go to the tree. I love Daniel Baril for mentioning race, and I love him for mentioning sex. Indeed, indeed, the struggle for emancipation from the slavery and the struggle for emancipation from the patriarchy went hand in hand. It was a long and uneven battle with not always parallel achievements, and let not forget that in the States, slaves were freed in 1865, but women had to wait till 1920 to receive the suffrage. What is the situation of women emancipation and situation of women today in the world? I think that wherever the theocracy has an upper hand, women are enslaved in patriarchal chains. In 1980, the supreme leader of Islamic Republic of Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini, openly declared that Islam is political or it is nothing. Grounding close in the divine authority, he turned an ancient nation of Persia into a ruthless theocracy. The first victim were women. Shirin Ebadi, a recipient of Nobel Peace Prize, a devout Muslim but a free spirit, had to put the veil on, lost her job, and after being persecuted, fled to the UK, where she is now continuing to work for the human rights. Another free spirit is Homa Archomand. Let's not forget that in 2005, she started a campaign against Sharia in Ontario, and her movement triggered an international support, and we avoided to have an archaic law in Canada. Today we have many quarrels disguised in religious cloak. In God's name, killings are going all over the world. What's behind this? What is driving it? Is it religion, or is it some relics of tribalism which try to separate people from each other? I think that once we take those theological clothes off, these are just political or social movements. And it seems to me that something very important is obfuscated here. It's something which is very important, something which harks back into the infancy of humanity, something which is deep in our subconscious. And that something is a profound yearning for the spirituality. No matter what source we get it from. Some may get it from sending prayers to some supernatural being. Others may get it from nature by simply listening to bubbling brooks. No matter what kind of external envelope that need for spirituality takes on, it's part of each of us. And this need of spirituality is documented scientifically. And in one of his books, Robert Bachman writes, and I will quote him, "Our brains lead us to readily undergo experiences that we have chosen to call God or spirituality or oneness with the universe or similar words or names. If the limbic system is activated by means of the right temporal lobe, a person will have an experience of spiritual or divine type. God is literally a state of mind." This is an interesting statement which is confirmed by experiments conducted by the scientists in many parts of the world. And one of our big specialists in neuroscience is Dr. Professor Michael Persinger in Sudbury. This is also in line with the conclusions of Daniel Baril. I already mentioned him. He is a Quebec anthropologist, beside being humanist and president of Secular Association. He sees religion as a byproduct of evolution, and contends that it would take the mutation of our species to make religion disappear. And all this may contradict Sam Harris, who in 2004 heralded the end of faith in the book of the same name. But be it as it may, all this theological or philosophical, neurological debate is to be left from the secularist point of view, is to be left with the experts in related fields. Secularist interest lies elsewhere, in separation and respect. Secularism guarantees the right of people, of all people of the world, to choose and practice religion of their choice, or not to choose any. Whether we believe in the afterlife or not, whether we worship Vishnu or Dionysus or Jehovah or none of those gods, we humans are fellow travelers on the same journey. So why not make that journey joyful? And I will conclude with the quote with Robert Greene Ingersoll. Happiness is the only good. The time to be happy is now. And the place to be happy is here. The way to be happy is to make others so. And I thank you for your patience.
Our next speaker that I'll introduce now is Rory McRandall. He was raised as a Catholic by his Anglican Sunday school teacher mum. Became an agnostic at the age of 13, and then in his late 20s found out the name of the faith that he had always held in his heart, the Baha'i faith. That journey led him to have an appreciation for all perspectives on matters of faith, from the devout to the atheistic. He believes that questions regarding the nature of reality and the meaning of life are the most important ones there are, and that everyone's life is a journey to seek meaningful answers to those questions. So why don't we welcome Rory to the podium?
Good evening. Almost forgot about this, Michelle. Beliefs can unite us, or they can divide us. We all know the story of a man who was born to a virgin mother and said to be the Son of God. A man born in humble circumstances amongst beasts, whose birth was prophesied by a star. When celebrating the marriage of friends, this man converted water into wine. His followers were born again through a baptism of water. His 12 disciples followed him as he rode into the city on the back of a donkey, as admirers laid down palm leaves in his path. He was killed in the springtime, dying for the sins of the world. After his death, he rose again in 3 days, and later ascended into heaven. And there is no one in this room who believes in this man. His name was Dionysus. Others may believe things very similar to what you believe, even though there are different labels applied to them. Imagine yourself in downtown Tehran in Iran. A large crowd has gathered, and they are passionately expressing their feelings about some important matter. The crowd is loud and chanting religious-based slogans. Of course, the religion they base these slogans on is a fundamentalist variety of Islam, the Muslim faith. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar! The crowd is worked into a frenzy. They're not open to expressions of other beliefs, of Christianity, of Judaism, of any kind of atheism. They are hostile to those belief systems, even naming them as agents of the great Satan. How would you feel in that crowd? Would you feel free to express your faith or beliefs? Would you be intimidated into silence? Would you begin chanting those Islamic slogans even though they did not express your own beliefs out of fear? Would you compromise your principles just to fit in? This, to a different degree perhaps, is how people who do not share the fundamentalist views of some Christians feel when they hear Bible-based expressions of condemnation, of judgment, of righteousness that include a presumption of the right to impose these views on others. My father used to say, "A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still." This applies very well to matters of faith. If you tell someone what they must believe and force them through violent or legal means to swear fealty to those beliefs, what you will get from them is nothing more than lip service. They may repeat the dogma that you have instilled in them, but in their heart of hearts, they will continue to believe whatever their own conscience dictates to them. Every faith I know of shares at its heart what is known in the Judeo-Christian tradition as the Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Even outside of religion, science teaches us the same principle through the concept of reciprocal altruism. If I treat you and yours kindly, you will be predisposed to treat me and mine in the same fashion. How could anyone who believes in the Golden Rule try to force their will on anyone else if they would not want this done to them? Many people of faith will agree that one of the greatest gifts God gave to humans was the gift of free will. If one assumes the existence of an omnipotent God, one must then assume that this God could have created us in any manner of his choosing, including the possibility that he could have forced us to believe in him with unshakable conviction. But clearly he did not. He gave us the choice to believe as we will. How could anyone who believes in God try to force others to believe when God himself chose not to do so? We cannot force others to believe what we believe if we actually respect those beliefs. We must remember that our beliefs are not knowledge. They are not facts. Knowledge relates to factual information we have learned. If I go and stand outside, I will know for a fact whether it is raining or not. I'll see it, I'll feel it, I'll get wet, or I won't. Belief is about a perspective on the nature of reality that holds meaning for us. I believe my wife is faithful to me, but I cannot know this for a fact, as I have not been with her every minute of every day since we were first married 30 years ago. My faith in my wife's faithfulness is not inferior to knowledge, but it is different than it. It is important to me, gives meaning to my marriage, and is an integral part of my happiness. Knowledge and belief are different things, complementary things. There are things we know about reality, about the nature of things, about this universe we share, and there are things we don't know. But there are also things we cannot know, but choose to believe because reality makes more sense to us when framed within those beliefs. This is true for people of all faiths and for people of no faith. We all have beliefs. None of us can know if our beliefs are correct or not. Faith is dependent on belief, not on knowledge. For faith to have power in our lives, it must rely on belief, which can motivate us in ways that knowledge never can. Our beliefs divide us when we presume the infallible dominance of our own set of beliefs and seek to impose them on others. Throughout history, wars have been fought in order for one group of people to force their beliefs on others. In doing so, they always betrayed their own beliefs and acted in contradiction of them. Secularism is the opposite of that. Some people think of secularism as being opposed to religious faith. But this is not what secularism is. True secularism seeks to create a space where people of all faiths and no faith can gather peacefully in harmony to address the concerns we all share. Our beliefs can unite us when we agree to respect each other's beliefs, when we uphold each other's right to hold whatever beliefs we choose, when we agree to treat each other as we wish to be treated. When we do these things, we establish a secular common space of respect and harmony. Thank you.
So I'd like to invite our third and last speaker for the evening. It's Bill Kilpatrick. In case we haven't offended you yet, here's Bill Kilpatrick to give his thoughts on secularism.
I haven't traveled as much as Dagmar. I am so happy to see so many people come out tonight. We were very, very worried about what the turnout was going to be like, and I think it's fantastic to see every seat filled, and the fact that we had to actually get more seats, so thank you guys all for coming out. I want to start out by telling you about an article that I recently read that grabbed my attention. It was published in the Vancouver Sun in December of 2011. Some folks at UBC decided to do a study after seeing a Gallup poll that suggested the majority of Americans would not vote for an atheist presidential candidate. So doctoral candidate Will Gervais decided to do a study into who people trust. So Gervais and his colleagues conducted a series of 6 studies on a group of 350 American adults and a group of 420 UBC students. In terms of its findings, I think the title speaks for itself, and I quote, "Do Christians believe in atheists? UBC study finds that believers distrust atheists as much as rapists." End quote. And the article goes on to say the following. It says, religious believers distrust atheists more than members of other religious groups, gays, and feminists. The only group that the study's participants distrusted as much as atheists was, of course, rapists. The prejudice had a significant impact on what kinds of jobs people said they would hire atheists to do, for obvious reasons. People are willing to hire an atheist for a job that is perceived as low trust, such as a waitress, because they don't steal money. But when hiring for a high trust job, like a daycare worker, they were like, nope, not going to hire an atheist for that job. The antipathy, and I actually said it right this time, I've been trying to get that, does not seem to run both ways. Atheists are indifferent to religious belief when it comes to deciding who is trustworthy. Atheists don't necessarily favor other atheists over Christians or anyone else, he said. They seem to think that religion is not an important signal for who you can trust. The researchers found that religious believers thought that descriptions of untrustworthy people, people who steal or cheat, were more likely to be atheists than Christians, Muslims, Jews, gays, or feminists. So don't play poker with me. But even in more secular Canada, distrust of atheists ran high. We consistently see strong effects, he said, even here in Vancouver. Our student participants still say that atheists are really untrustworthy, end quote. So I must assure you that although this article focuses on atheists, it was not chosen specifically for that reason. This article, if nothing else, shows that we have not come very far in judging morality, as many people still judge not by what other people do, but by expected behaviors. If we think about it, we see that these findings aren't based on any known facts. Well, you haven't played poker with me, but, but rather on fear, bias, and stereotypes, the very things that we're here tonight to dispel concerning secularism. The findings, however, do explain one major thing. The odd looks that I get around town. I didn't realize that that's where they came from, that I was, on that same level, so... But moreover, it speaks to why it's so important to understand how we decide morality and what's right and wrong. Many of you may know, and some of you don't, but I rarely shy away from controversy, and this speech will be no exception. Morals are controversial, no matter where they're discussed in the world, but morality, and even more specifically secular morality, is an extremely controversial topic, and therefore it must be further defined, discussed, and developed. The concerns by many religious people that secularism spells the end of morality is a serious concern that has to be examined, as I believe that it feeds into the fear that is at the root of much of the religious resistance to secularism. The religious argument against a secular society runs essentially like this. If you don't have God, prophets, religions, divine revelation, the concept of sin and the day of judgment as a basis for a society's rules, then where do you get your guidance from? What is the source of your morality? In order to answer this question, we must first distinguish between two different types of truth, if I can be so bold to use such a controversial term as truth. In his book, Can We Be Good Without God?, Robert Buckman distinguishes between two types of truth. Buckman points out that the Christian, Muslim, and Jewish religions believe that their codes of behavior were given to them from on high and codified in holy books. This type of truth he calls revealed truth, because it was revealed to the select few by God. And as Buckman points out, since the advent of science, observation, methodology, we've been able to test many of these behavioral hypotheses that were laid out in these books. Also, we've been able to observe human behavior under many differing circumstances, allowing us to see how humans actually behave, and these observations has led us to what is referred to as derived truths. So my argument is that it's the search for derived truth that is the essence of secular morality. One of the main purveyors of this outlook also happens to be one of our sponsors tonight, which is the Center for Inquiry. The Center for Inquiry promotes the advances of reason, science, secularism, and freedom of inquiry in all areas of human endeavor. Thus, we should always be examining and re-examining our beliefs, because we live in a constantly changing world, and our beliefs change with it. So one such inquiry came, as Dagmar, pointed out in the speech that I read before that one, in the early 20th century with the advancement of women's rights that directly challenged the dominant religious belief of patriarchy. So to illustrate this point, I bring your attention to an essay. It was written in 2007 that explores the religious belief in patriarchy and its connection to domestic violence. This article cites much of the research that's been done over the last 40 years, and its conclusion is quite poignant. It says, and I quote, "All forms of patriarchy can and do contribute to domestic violence. It appears that the models of patriarchy which give husbands the greatest level of power and authority are most likely to stimulate domestic violence." End quote. Now, this study wasn't written by a feminist, it wasn't written by a communist, an agnostic, or even a rapist. Oh, I mean an atheist. So easy to confuse them. So easy. Happens all the time. This was written by Stephen R. Tracy, who was a professor of theology and ethics at Phoenix Seminary in Arizona. So clearly an unbiased person. It's a perfect example of a derived truth that stands in direct contrast to a revealed truth, that men are superior to women. I think most women would agree. And has led many, especially in the Christian religion community, to adopt what they call soft patriarchy, that takes a more egalitarian view of marriage and parenting. So why would I choose this as my example? It's because I believe that this represents a common value among secularists and members of the religious community. And that's what I'm here promoting tonight, our shared values. I don't believe that anyone wants to live in a world where people are allowed to abuse or dominate others. We collectively know that equality is better than oppression or dominance. But lately, much of the political rhetoric, especially down in the States, focuses on our secular and religious differences, which are always characterized as many and irreconcilable. But the media's goal is to sell newspapers, we know that, and get as many viewers as possible. So of course they're going to focus on the most heated and controversial topics, like abortion and same-sex marriage. But I believe that even these highly charged issues, when deconstructed, reveal more commonalities concerning the differing viewpoints than conceived differences in terms of morality. However, there's neither the time nor the police protection to attempt to tackle those issues tonight. No, what I want to focus on is secular morality. As I stated earlier, morality and ethics are very complicated issues. But it doesn't mean that philosophers haven't tried to solve some of these issues over the years. For example, back in the late 18th and early 19th century, the eminent German philosopher Immanuel Kant set out to show that there are some moral rules that are common to all of humanity. He called this the categorical imperative. And the example that Kant gives is lying. Everyone, religious or not, can agree that lying is bad. We teach our children this, and it's reinforced by both the religious and secular worldviews. But can it really be applied universally to all people, in all time periods, in all circumstances? On the face of it, we'd all say that yes, it's always better to tell the truth than to lie. I mean, we tell our kids that. I tell my kid that all the time. But I ask you, would the world have been a better place if the Christians who hid the Jews from the Nazis during the Second World War simply believed that they should not bear false witness when the Gestapo showed up and asked them if they had any Jews? Should they have rendered unto Caesar what was Caesar's? I don't believe anyone here is going to say that the right thing to do in that situation is to tell the truth and give the Jews over to the Gestapo. The right thing to do in that situation is lie, lie, lie. It is. So thus the revealed truth that one should not bear false witness and should render unto Caesar what is Caesar's is overruled by the belief that people should not simply be killed for who they are or what they believe. Now, Rory spoke earlier about the golden rule being a universal value. But as Robert Buckman points out, it's also subject to place, time, and personal beliefs. He states, quote, "There is an important difference between, on the one hand, treating others as you want to be treated, and on the other hand, trying to be aware of the consequences of your actions on others. The difference is that under the golden rule, you project your own expectations onto the other person. So if, on the other hand, you are guided by the principle of consideration of consequences, then you'll try to anticipate the resulting effect on the other person, ignoring, if need be, the way in which you would respond if it were you." Now that is a difference worth noting. So the flaw in the golden rule is that it can be used so easily as a justification for selfish instincts. It is just as likely to feed into our aggressive instincts as it is to promote more constructive behavior, end quote. The golden rule, as good as it is, can also not be applied universally. So what can we learn from these examples? Are moral rules good? Yes, but only when combined with thinking, context, and critical thought. Moral rules should change with time, circumstances, and interpretation, and in fact, they do just that. I'll cite Buckman again. He says, quote, "If you stop and think about the effect of what you're about to do on the people you're about to do it, you might reconsider a potentially destructive act," end quote. It's a simple premise, but it's a very tough application, as the main assumption behind it is that we all will see other people as people and not as things. And unfortunately, we know that that's not necessarily always the reality. So secular morality is based on observable behaviors and those consequences on humanity. I think that everyone would agree that this is a fairly good ground to build on. Most people here would more readily swallow a drug that they know has been tested and approved, as opposed to an untested drug that someone simply says is okay. We don't buy cars without driving them and looking under the hood. Well, some of us do. So why should morality be any different? So this brings us to the ultimate question. What is worth uniting for? Or better yet, what can we all agree on some basic level, especially concerning morality? The Canadian Civil Liberties Association argues that, quote, "Whatever differences people may have on any number of issues, there is a common interest in avoiding the dangers of tyranny and ensuring the blessings of liberty," end quote. I think this is an excellent place to start. But first we have to unpack a couple of the more loaded terms. What does tyranny mean? Simply put, I like to think of it as when people try to enforce their beliefs by force or coercion on others, by making them act, behave, or think along some ideological or theological lines. I believe X, and I'm a good person, so everybody should believe X, and the world would be a better place. So I'm going to enact laws or otherwise force people to conform to my beliefs, thus making the world better. Whereas liberty, simply stated, is when people have the freedom to choose what they believe is best for themselves, in terms of their beliefs, behaviors, partners, etc., as long as those choices do not harm another person. So if someone decides that they found the truth, then they're free in a secular society to exercise those beliefs, as long as they don't harm another person while they pursue those beliefs. So beliefs are sanctified in a secular society, but no belief is held above another. And behaviors are judged by the impact we have on another person, be that a child, a neighbor, a friend, or anyone else we happen along on our life's path, and while we pursue our ultimate goals, whatever they may be. For example, the argument has been thrown around a lot lately that Canada is a Christian country, and that much of its current social problems are a result of its losing touch with that Christian heritage. Now maybe this is true, maybe it's not. I honestly don't know. But I do know that many of those who believe this also believe that it would be a good thing if we installed a Christian government, and that somehow this would solve many of those problems that are currently plaguing our society. My only question is, for the people who hold such a view, and that bug apparently, is which of the 42,000 branches of Christianity should be installed as a government? And what then becomes of those who don't believe in the same things? And I'm not simply referring to members of other religions, because that's too obvious. I'm referring to other members of the Christian religions who believe that they have the right interpretation of that particular book, and believe that they should be the ones dictating the laws. I raise this question not as an attack on Christianity, but to show how immensely complicated the situation is. We see theocracies such as Saudi Arabia, who've banned all other religions and repressed women. We see Sunni and Shia Muslims killing each other day in and day out in the news, despite the fact that they both consider themselves followers of Islam. Our soldiers fought and died in Afghanistan battling one of the most religious and most repressive governments of the 21st century. Do we really want that kind of religious divisiveness here in Canada? I think the answer is and will remain a resounding no. However, confusion around what secularism is complicates this matter that much more. A recent article that was discussing the proposed secular charter in Quebec, it was published by Brian Stiller in the Canadian Christianity website. It's an example of the confusion around this thing called secularism. So Brian Stiller writes, and I quote, "Secular in part," and this is his words, in part means the exclusion of religious institutions from running government." We've kind of agreed on that. The secular movement in Quebec in the 1960s succeeded in excluding the Roman Catholic Church from running schools, influencing public policy, and being favored by government. Quebec became the forerunner of the now secular federal and provincial Canadian governments. As a Christian, I believe secular is good in this sense. Canada is secular, free from control by a religious organization, liberal. There is freedom for the individual, and democratic. Citizens freely vote to elect their political leaders. I do not want any religion to run the country. I celebrate human rights. I value democracy. As one has noted, while messy, it is the best option. Secularism is another issue. As an idea, it advocates that religious ideas, not just religious institutions, have no place in the public sphere. So one can be a Jew, a Muslim, a Christian, but one is required to leave one's faith at the door of public life. I support a secular government, as opposed to a religious government such as the one that governs Iran. However, I oppose secularism. A person's religious views by nature must influence what he or she does in serving the public sphere. Without exception, and unsurprisingly, MPs who identify themselves as Christians say that their faith influences what they say and do, not the religious or church institutions, but what they personally believe. This is Brian Stiller's distinction between secular and secularism. So in short, Mr. Stiller doesn't want any religion to run the country, but he believes that a person's religious views by nature must influence what a person does in serving the public sphere. It doesn't take one long to think that the more people you get in who believe religious things, all of a sudden makes it a religious government. So it's a very, very confusing argument. He seems to believe that the government can be secular and full of religious people who act out their religious beliefs at the same time. I would liken this argument to someone saying that they're for a state run by Nazis, but they're against Nazism, or that they're for a communist state, but against communism, or that they're in favor of the Conservative Party running Canada, but they're against conservatism. The reality is that a government official is elected to serve all of his or her constituents and must do what is in the public's best interest, regardless of their personal or religious view. To act any differently is a divisive road that we need not take. We can already see examples in the current Conservative government of how a person's religious views, in Mr. Stiller's words, must influence what they do in serving the public sphere by the bitter divisiveness of the controversial Bill M312. These are hard things to discuss, people. They combine religion and politics, the two things we're told never, ever to discuss, right? You're not supposed to discuss it. But we have to have these hard discussions, as I believe it's more important than ever to clarify what our common goals are and work together towards those ends. John Stuart Mill, who's been called the father of liberty, said it best when he said, quote, "Humankind are greater gainers by suffering each other to live as seems good to themselves than by compelling each to live as seems good to the rest," end quote. And this, I believe, is the idea that goes to the core of secularism and its connection to freedom. You have every right to believe what you want and thus behave as you see fit, as long as it doesn't harm your fellow humans. However, you don't have the right to impose those beliefs or behaviors on another person. For example, if you don't agree with abortion, for instance, you don't have to do it. That's part of a free society. but don't expect the rest of the world to bend to that particular worldview. Don't expect the rights of others to be restricted because of your beliefs. Thus, live as you see fit, but don't expect others to live as you do, because to do otherwise is nothing but an act of tyranny. I'll leave you with the words of Winston Churchill, who once said, quote, that a democracy is the worst form of government that people can have, except all of the other forms that have been tried from time to time. So I'd like for us to make the best of the worst situation by working collectively towards a secular democratic government. Thank you.